It seems like one of the best places to live in the world, but what was once heart of a global empire has undergone a dramatic shift. Today, more than 1 in 4 people in the city live in poverty, and homelessness is 8 times the national average. It's easy to see why people are being pushed onto the streets, and in the midst of one of the biggest property crises in the city's history, nearly 45% of all property purchases in central London are made by foreign buyers.
According to the Office of National Statistics, the median household disposable income in the UK is just under £37 per year, while the median house price is £270,000. With housing stress defined as spending more than 30% of your disposable income on housing, they'd be turned down for a loan. That's why I call banks non-existent middlemen at this end of the market. You need a bank loan to enter the market, but they won't let you enter the market in the first place if you're a median income earner. Now, the UK's long-term data is very informative here because it highlights just how much the deregulation of bank lending created the housing unaffordability problem that affects average income earners across the world today, and particularly in Anglo-Saxon countries. Firstly, there was no trend at all in UK house prices until well after World War II. With the inflation-adjusted price index set to 100 in 1980, the year that Maggie Thatcher came to power, the house price index was 47 in 1845 and 47 in 1960. Once Maggie Thatcher was in charge, the prices rose by 3% per year. Now, to put that into perspective, at the rate of increase before Thatcher, it would have taken 280 years for house prices to double. At the rate between 1945 and Thatcher, they were doubling every 40 years. After Thatcher, real house prices doubled every 23 years. Now, house prices didn't rise just because the Iron Lady was in charge. It's what she did that made the difference. Before World War II, household debt had been constant relative to GDP. It was 9% of GDP in 1980 and 8.5% in 1947. Most lending for housing was done by building societies, and this is crucial because building society loans don't create money. Instead, building societies have deposit accounts at the private banks, and when they make loans, their accounts fall by precisely as much as the borrower's accounts rise. Banks, on the other hand, increase their assets, loans to households, and their liabilities, household deposits, by precisely the same amount when they make loans. This causes the money supply to expand, and particularly the money supply used to buy houses. This expands both aggregate demand and incomes, but most of it drives up house prices. Some more houses are built, but overwhelmingly, bank loans make existing houses more expensive. Thatcher deregulated mortgage lending when she came to power, and banks took over from building societies as the primary lenders. The rate of growth of household debt exploded, and house price inflation took off as well. Household debt increased by a factor of 4, from 20% of GDP to 80% of GDP in 2007, when the global financial crisis hit. Now, obviously, the city did very well out of deregulating the finance sector, but for the average Briton, this was a policy mistake and it should be reversed. This is because deregulated lending set off an obvious vicious cycle. More mortgage debt caused house prices to rise, which encouraged more mortgage debt, which causes house prices to rise. Higher prices meant higher collateral for more lending, and rising house prices encouraged speculators to buy houses rather than people who actually wanted to live in them. This kept on going until the rising debt crashed the economy, as it did in the global financial crisis. So that's the problem. What's the solution? I can think of 3 policies, at least 2 of which are politically feasible, but only if they're done together. These are property income limited leverage, the PIL, affordable housing authority, AHA, and a modern debt jubilee. The PIL and AHA have to be done together because they attack 2 ends of the predicament we are currently in, and they have balancing effects on each other in terms of how they change house prices. The PIL would reduce house prices while the AHA would increase them, and simultaneously enable people who are low income earners to buy a house, which they currently can't do. So the PIL would limit a mortgage to some multiple of the rental income that the property being purchased can be expected to earn, whether that's the actual rental income or imputed rental income that statisticians calculate. Rents have risen enormously in recent years, but they still have risen far less than both house prices and mortgages. Finding decent UK data is difficult, but with the ratio of London house prices to average rental payments being about 25, this implies that new mortgages today would be on average to about 20 times the annual rental income of the property being purchased. The pill would start at the current ratio, and then it would be reduced gradually over time until it reached about 10 to 1. This would drastically reduce the leverage currently applied to house prices, and houses would cease being an attractive speculative investment, which they should never have been in the first place. Now, obviously, this would place enormous downward pressure on house prices, and that would be politically popular with the majority of the population now that is locked out from home ownership today. But it would be politically toxic for property owning baby boomers. And that's where the Affordable Housing Authority comes in. It would put upward pressure on house prices while simultaneously making it easier for low-income households to buy a home. It would do this by cutting out a non-existent middleman, the banks. Currently, the reason that low-income earners can't afford to buy houses is not just that they're too damn expensive, but also that you have to borrow money to buy them and pay interest on that borrowed money. Now, if the median household wanted to buy the median house and somehow scrape together a 10% deposit, then at 7% interest, the payments on a 25-year mortgage work out to $20,600 a year, more than half their disposable income. With housing stress defined as spending more than 30% of your disposable income on housing, they'd be turned down for a loan. That's why I call banks non-existent middlemen at this end of the market. You need a bank loan to enter the market, but they won't let you enter the market in the first place if you're a median income earner. But what if the median income earner could get a loan at no interest? Now, at 7% interest, more than half the money paid over the life of the loan is interest. Interest makes up £271,000 of the $514,000 total. But at 0% interest, yearly payments total £9,300. That's 26% of disposable income, which is below the household stress level. So why do banks charge interest? If they didn't, they wouldn't create the money in the first place. They're in the banking business to make a profit, and there's no profit on privately created money without interest being charged on top. What if there was a lender, the Affordable Housing Authority, that didn't need to charge interest? It would be financed by government money creation. Then it would lend to buyers who earn the median wage or below, maybe even the average, given how bad house prices are now. They would use those funds to buy houses that they currently can't afford to buy, so the government-created money would go to the house sellers, and finally the buyer would repay the principal of the loan over the next 25 years. This is shown here in this table, and I know that not charging interest on a loan sounds like socialist heresy. So in my defense, I'm going to cite two famous capitalists, Henry Ford and Thomas Edison. A century ago, they realized that the main thing that made huge public work programs uneconomic was not the construction costs, but paying interest to the banks on the loan for the construction costs. Ford and Edison wanted to have the Muscle Shoals hydroelectric plant built, and they argued that it should be financed by government money creation at no interest. They realized that, to quote Edison, that is what Henry Ford wants to prevent. He thinks it's stupid, and so do I, that for $30 million of their own money, the people of the United States should be compelled to pay $66 million. That is what it amounts to with interest. People who will not turn a shovel of dirt nor contribute a pound of material will collect more money from the United States than will the people who supply the materials and do the work. That is the terrible thing about interest. Similarly, what's stopping us from enabling average income earners from buying housing today is the interest they have to pay to banks to buy a house. Banks which also will not turn a shovel of dirt nor contribute a pound of material. And they won't even lend to the average income earner in the first place. So let's cut banks out of the market they won't even enter. Let's establish an affordable housing authority, finance it via government-created money, and enable the working class and middle class families to own their own homes once again. So the way this works is the government decides to create AHA and finances exactly the same way that it currently finances spending in excessive taxation, by going into negative financial equity, which creates identical positive financial equity for the non-government sector. This then allows low-income buyers to purchase houses, and the ultimate financial beneficiaries are the house sellers. In this way, AHA would counter the effect of the pill, increasing demand for housing, while the pill would reduce leverage on bank loans, directly reducing prices that way. The one drawback at this point is that without bond sales, AHA would drive the Treasury's account at the central bank into overdraft, and that's not allowed by current laws. Now, that can easily be addressed by selling AHA bonds to the private banks, just as ordinary Treasury bonds are currently sold to cover deficit spending today. This would mean that banks would get interest income as a side effect of the policy, which might make them less likely to oppose it politically. And as applies right now with bonds for the government deficit, this interest isn't an unpayable burden, but government money creation for the banking sector to recompense them for maintaining the payment system. So this scheme creates winners all round. Most importantly, people who earn less than the average income would be able to buy houses, even given the current ridiculous prices. Sellers who would lose out from the pillar loan reducing what bank finance buyers can spend would benefit from increased demand from AHA finance buyers. Even the banks, who don't currently earn any interest from below average income earners because they won't lend to them given how expensive housing is right now, would get interest income on AHA bonds. Now, I can't see Labor or the Conservatives bringing in policies like these, not only because they've been captured by the city, but also because they still believe mainstream economic myths like loanable funds. But the Greens, or Corbyn and Sultana's Your Party, or Galloway's Workers' Party, with more than half of Britain's voting age population now unable to buy a house, this combination of policies could be an electoral winner. If you'd like to discuss it, just drop me a line. Now that covers the two policies that I think are politically viable, but it still leaves the main problem untreated: excessive private debt. While politicians of all persuasions have obsessed about government debt, private debt is the one that ballooned and lies behind all, or almost all, of the social and economic problems we experience today. This is where my third policy idea comes in: modern debt jubilee. It's what we really need to reduce private debt, but in a way that doesn't cause an economic collapse in the process. And I'll cover that concept in my next video in the context of America's house price bubble.
Like many other truth seekers, and want to learn 50 years of real economics from me in only 7 weeks, you'll love my new 7-week Rebel Economist Challenge as well. To apply, go to stevekeen.com. If you qualify, you can attend my lectures, ask me questions personally every week, and make friends with a great group of like-minded people. So again, like many others, go to stevekeen.com to apply as well for the 7-week Rebel Economist Challenge. Good luck.